Welcome to the session of the sponsor section on Madrid Protocol in Latin America. Let me share my screen.
Hello, all you.
Okay, no. Well, I'm Rafael, and we are here also with Alvaro. We are going to be your hosts today for this session on the latest trends on Madrid Protocol in Latin America.
We will try to be optimistic, but the latest trends are not very new, in fact, because the Brazilian office is facing a lot of difficulties, as you will see along our explanation.
And in fact, it is still a work in progress here with the BPTO, and some of the difficulties that Alvaro mentioned, they derive from this attempt to adapt in the short term that was provided to the BPTO to do so after the law has passed and we acceded to the Madrid Protocol. The focus today is mainly Brazil, but also Latin America. You can see there are still a lot of countries that have not yet joined Madrid Protocol. We had a trend in 2019 with Canada and Brazil from the Americas that joined in the same year, but since then only Trinidad and Tobago in the Americas actually joined. We understand, and we'll be discussing that later on, that some other countries are considering to join as well, but it's still only for Latin America specifically, very few countries have so far joined.
As far as we are concerned, only Chile is a little more ahead on the negotiations.
So to start with some figures of what has happened so far and what happened last year, these are figures from WIPO, so it's available on WIPO's report, the annual report that they issue. In Mexico, last year we had over 10,000 designations, 10,000 international registrations that designated Mexico, but only 11 international registrations originated from Mexico have been filed, designating 63 countries. You're going to see later on that there has been a huge decrease from the year before, as only 11 international registrations have actually been filed in Mexico, seeking to designate other countries. Whereas in Colombia, they had 43 designations and approximately 4,000 designations received.
Which is a proportion not ideal, but is a little less deceiving than the proportion in Mexico for 2020.
Exactly, it's like 10 times less in terms of proposed proportion. Well, in Brazil, in the first full year, we had almost 10,000 designations, 9,400 designations. We received that total amount, while from Brazil, a total of 139 international registrations originated, which is somewhat expected, right, Alvaro?
Yeah, even a little surprising, because they were expecting a little less. It should be based on WIPO's expectations, should be around 90, and we have like 50%, almost 50% more, which is positive, because having in mind all the difficulties Brazil is facing, especially regarding finance, the prices for WIPO are not exactly cheap for when you do the conversion for Brazilian money. Maybe that's the reason Mexico also diminished considerably in 2020. I'm not sure. Maybe the pandemic contribute to that decrease in Mexico. This is something we should find out.
Exactly, and we need to see if this trend is going to keep on going, or if we're going to see a decrease in the future as it's no longer something new. But let's see what happens. Well, the Brazilian Patent and Trademark Office, they also have their figures, and they have a panel with the total amount of designations received so far, almost 20,000 designations since 2019, but only 7,000 decisions so far. And what worries us is that this could lead to the return of a backlog in Brazil.
Yeah, this reflects what Rafael said at the beginning, that the Brazilian office was not fully prepared to receive the applications through Madrid protocol. They were doing fine with the local ones, but they needed some more time to adapt. For instance, they are accepting multi-class applications via Madrid, but not if you file in Brazil, because they don't have the proper software, and the ones that come through Madrid are examined separately. If you have 3 classes, each class will be examined separately, and then they will put them back together. This is one of the reasons that led to this highly number of pending decisions.
Well, but when you see the big picture, you see that Brazil is doing pretty well, considering that it has been only the first year of accession to the Madrid Protocol. We are already near Mexico, which has been a member of the Madrid Protocol for almost 10 years. We are at 9,000, almost 10,000 designations. So we received a lot of international designations here in Brazil. We already surpassed Turkey and other important jurisdictions. You see that we are near Mexico and even near India, still behind Korea, but we are apparently it's been a success for WIPO since Brazil has joined.
Yeah, the projections from WIPO before the beginning of the protocol in Brazil was more or less that they were expecting Brazil to be between India and Mexico, so we're almost there.
On the other hand, when you see the number of international registrations that originated from Brazil, the number is still a little bit small. We had a total of 229 international applications that have been certified by the BPTO. There is a considerable number of international applications that have not been accepted by the BPTO, usually due to formal deficiencies. Sometimes applicants trying to do it by themselves, they face difficulties. It's a difficult process. You all know it. The forms, WIPO's forms, are not so self-explanatory, and we need to do that in a foreign language, either in Spanish or in English. So for local applicants, when they try to do it themselves, even with the help of the BPTO, which has been very helpful to enlighten and to educate local applicants on how to do it, even that they face difficulties. And then when you look at the big picture, when you just select the middle income countries, Brazil is doing pretty well. Of course, this slide here, WIPO does not include China or Russia or Turkey. But when you take all the other middle income countries, we are already at the top 5. Ukraine, of course, is near Europe, so they probably seek that jurisdiction. Europe is it's by far one of the largest filing region, as well as a large recipient of international registrations, designations directed to that region. So when you see Ukraine, when you see Bulgaria, for instance, probably that's the reason that they are among the top 3. But when you look at Colombia and Mexico, you see that they are falling behind. Mexico, I really don't know what happened this year. Only 11 international registrations. They usually had around 100 in the last. I don't know if there's someone from Mexico here.
It is really curious because Colombia used to be on several numbers behind Mexico, and now it is totally different. I don't know if Colombia increased the number or only Mexico decreased, or both.
Well, and now we come to Brazil. We come to focus on Brazil, specifically on the details of what to expect when you have a Brazilian designation. Of course, we are always open to questions, but usually the first question is, can I designate Brazil using my existing international registration, even if it's before, it has been registered before Brazilian accession, which happened on October 2nd, 2019? Well, the answer is no, and it's an important issue. You can only designate Brazil for international registrations granted after October 2nd.
And this is this shows that the office did the right choice, because as we showed in a few slides before, they have already a considerable backlog considering applications for designations from October 2nd on. If we had all the other existing registrations being extended to Brazil, I believe the chaos would be already installed.
It's true, and when you look behind at what happened in Mexico and in Colombia, the number of local designations, they increased very slowly. But when you look at Brazil, we already had almost 10,000 designations in the first full year. And Alvaro said correctly that we would be receiving a flood of international of foreign designations, of course Brazilian BR designations here in Brazil. And if the Brazilian PTO is already facing a huge issue avoiding the return of the backlog, we can only imagine what would happen if we just received twice the amount that we received so far.
And since the applications, once they reach the Brazilian office, they follow the regular procedure of like any other application, this could also pose problems with, for instance, the same applicant that already maybe had a registration in Brazil, Brazilian registration, in fact, then will lead to a refusal based on duplicity. That applicant would have to appeal or cancel the previous application registration. So that would be really a mess.
Exactly.
And this is one of the reasons that Brazil, the office is taking that long, because they follow the regular system. The application is published for oppositions. They have opposition or not. Then they have the exam based on anteriorities. And then they accept it for registration. We're going there right now, right? On the acceptance and the payment. There we are.
Exactly, and the question would be, am I required to pay any additional fees upon allowance of my BR designation? And as Alvaro said, yes, we need to have very, very careful. We need to be very, very careful here and focus your attention in this aspect, because basically only Brazil and Japan, they require the payment of a second part of the individual fees when the trademark application, when the BR designation is allowed for Brazil. So you usually have 2 months to actually pay. The payment is done directly at WIPO, and it can be tricky because first the international registrant would receive a letter saying that, okay, your trademark, the BR designation has been approved, and only then would the international registrant receive the second letter saying now you have to pay the second part of fees. So if you miss the second letter and you miss the deadline for the payment of the second part of the fees, you would eventually lose your BR designation. It would be considered as abandoned. So if you don't pay the second part of fees, of the individual fees, you just lose your local designation, and you have either to redesignate Brazil and once again pay the fees, the filing fees,
and wait online also.
Exactly, and someone else could have secured a registration for your trademark, or file a national application, which is also possible.
But although this can be tricky, if it is too complicated for the applicant or foreign agents to do so, we are allowed to pay these fees directly at WIPO. So we can control this if desired.
Exactly. Well, and we have another point of attention here. Can I record a license agreement with WIPO? That's not typically possible with other international registration. You can record your license agreements citing the local designations. But when it comes to Brazil, no. The answer is no. The record of license agreement will only have legal effect in Brazil if made directly with Brazilian IP office. Recordos with WIPO will not be recognized. And this is important because a particularity of Brazil is that if you're sending money abroad, you're remitting royalties to a foreign company, you're only allowed to do so if you first register your license agreement with the BPTO and then with the Brazilian Central Bank. If you don't do it, you're not allowed to send the money abroad, or your licensee is not allowed to do so. And of course, they can only do that once the trademark is registered. Brazil does not allow the remittance of royalties abroad when it comes to trademark applications.
And by registered, Rafael meant registered by the Brazilian office, not the registration started at WIPO. So if you have, for instance, you had an application that was extended to Brazil in the beginning of 2020, and it's still pending, royalties for that trademark cannot be sent abroad, and will only be possible to send it from the day of the grant, cannot be for instance, accumulate the money from the past months and then send all together. No, you have to begin counting from the registration by the Brazilian office. This is one of the reasons you need a certificate.
Exactly, and then you have to go through the entire process. Of course, there are some alternatives that can be considered, and we are always available to help. But as a rule, you can only do so after the trademark has been registered with the BPTO. And that leads us to another issue that should be considered, which reflects whether or not the Brazilian designations would take the same amount of time to be decided as a local national application. And the answer is no. As you can see in this chart, while we can get a first decision for a national application within approximately 8 to 10 months, when you come to BR designation, it is currently taking around 12 to 14 months. And this is counted from the day that the Brazilian designation arrives at the Brazilian Patent and Trademark Office. So if you first file it with your national office, then the national office reviews it, approves it, certifies it, and then sends it to AIPPI, which is still going to review it and approve it or not, and then send it to the national PTOs, you can add from 2 to 6 months to the total amount. So while you could get a registration in approximately 8 to 10 months in Brazil, if you file a national application, it takes a little bit more if you're going through the road of the international registration. And as we said before, when the first decision is issued, if it's an approval, if it's an allowance, you still have to comply with the deadline to pay the final fees, the final registration fees. It's valid for international registrations, but it's also valid for national applications. The difference is that if you paid for national applications directly to the office, the publication of grant of registration usually takes around 15 to 45 days. Whereas if you do it through AIPPI, you need to do it if you have a BR designation, you still need to receive the letter, wait for the letter, wait AIPPI to open the deadline for you to pay the second part of the individual fees, and then you effect payment, and then you have to wait AIPPI to send the information to the Brazilian Patent and Trademark Office, which will manually deal with this information and put it into the systems, and then publish the grant of registration. So the total amount of time is currently taking around 3 to 4 months. So that's the amount of time you need to wait. And then when you finally get to receive your certificate of registration, if it's to be issued in connection with the national application, it's currently taking around 30 to 60 days. While for BR designations, they haven't yet issued a single certificate of registration.
They're probably facing, we assume they're facing technical issues because they have to modify some data that appear in the certificate, and they haven't reached a conclusion on how to do it and what to do it. And this is taking a long time.
And the issue here is that a certificate of registration would be important in Brazil if you're, for instance, file an infringement action, if you're registering your trademark in one of the online platforms of those marketplaces, such as Amazon, such as Mercado Livre, such as other types of marketplaces that actually allow you to enforce your trademark rights. preventing counterfeit. And they usually require you showing that you do have your trademark registered in Brazil. Even for registering a trademark as an AdWord, Brazil has curiously has very stringent case law on the use of trademarks as AdWords or by third parties. This is usually not allowed unless you have an authorization from the trademark registrant. And but if you don't have a certificate, you'll face a hard time trying to enter in one of those IP protection programs that these online platforms allow you to.
And then just simply the publication or the WIPO's certificate will not be useful, because according to the Brazilian law, all formal documents have to be in Portuguese. So translation of the WIPO certificate cannot be used.
Yes, you end up facing with difficulties. We understand a similar scenario happens in China, where you actually need to apply for a certificate of registration. In Brazil, it's going to be different. Once you pay the second part of fees, the Brazilian Trademark Office will automatically issue the certificate for registration once it is available. And we don't know when this is going to happen, unfortunately.
And the certificate will be digital. The problem is technical.
Exactly.
That's an important point.
Yes. Will I be notified by the BPTO or by WIPO about the positions and administrative nullity actions? That is to say, will I be notified if anyone tries to oppose or challenge my trademark application or my trademark registration in a post-registration procedure? And the answer here is no. And that's an important point. I don't know, Alvaro, if you want to comment on that, but the BPTO will not be sending you any individual notices on oppositions filed against the BR designation.
They consider this to be an internal proceeding, so has no issue with WIPO, but it is highly recommended that you have someone in Brazil following up the publications on the case, because you may lose a deadline, for instance, to respond an opposition or a nullity proceeding, and then the case will be decided under the light of the arguments of the other party only. So it is important, or even you can, the applicant can follow up the Brazilian publications, but the applicant will not be allowed to respond, or it will be very difficult because the opposition was presented in Portuguese, so the response has to be presented in Portuguese by a local agent or by the applicant itself. So it's highly recommended to appoint a local agent to follow the application until registration.
And it's important to highlight that this is no different from a local national application, because the BPTO, it does not send any individual notices. All notices are published in the Brazilian Industrial Property Journal for the knowledge of the third parties, but also for the knowledge of the applicants and registrants. So they consider it to be an equal solution. You just have to monitor the weekly issues of the BP, of the Brazilian IP journal. Well, then, will I be notified by BPTO or WIPO about provisional refusals? Well, here, the answer is a little bit different because yes, the BPTO will notify WIPO of provisional refusals. However, the 60-day deadlines to take appeal or respond to office actions accounted from the notice published in the Brazilian AIPPI journal. That is to say, even if you receive the notice from WIPO directly, you must take into consideration the publication of the decision in the Brazilian AIPPI journal because your deadline counts from that specific publication.
And the reason why they notify the WIPO of the refusals is because they consider it to be a decision. Oppositions are not decisions. So that's the basis for why this and not that.
Exactly. Well, I have received different information on the need of local representative from IBR designation. Do I really need one? Well, it depends. Let's take a closer look on that because as we have previously informed, there are pros and cons when it comes to whether or not having your trademark registration application or the BR designation monitored by a colleague here in Brazil. Until registration is granted, the BPTO will only require local representation for actions to be undertaken directly before the IP office. So if you need to take an action or if you need to submit a response to an office action, a response to an opposition, or even if you need to rectify the translation of goods, and that's an important aspect.
Which has been occurred a lot, in fact.
Exactly. And this occurs mainly because the BPTO, they do a mixture of automatic translation and human revised translation. So sometimes the same English or Spanish term ends up having different translations. Some of the translations can be accurate. Many of the translations have not been accurate and need to be revised because when you're going to enforce your trademark registration here in Brazil, you will have to rely on the Portuguese version of the specification of the description of goods and services. And when you have to do that, when you have to apply for the rectification, when you have to take appeal, then any action taken directly before the IP office needs to be done by a local representative. But, and of course, as we've said before, if you're going to monitor, you also have it. We're going to further discuss this later on. But what about after registration is granted? Do I still need one? Do I still need the local representative? That's a tricky issue, right, Alvaro?
Yeah, that's the point where we understand it is needed based on the law, but we don't have any concrete case yet to prove it is the law will be enforced or not.
Yes, the fact that this particular point has not yet been challenged before our courts. So if, for instance, you're going to enforce a trademark registration against a third party, we really don't know if this third party might simply seek the cancellation of a trademark registration in the absence of a local representative.
Which, according to the law, that third party could do it if there is no local representative recorded before the office. It's simply a registration that's standing there. Nothing has ever happened that needed someone to present a petition in Brazil before the office. So it is there registered. If someone doesn't want to wait for the forfeiture time in thesis, that person could start cancellation action based on the provision of section 217 of the law.
Exactly.
But like we said, in thesis, we don't know how this would be received by the courts.
And of course, if one of these post-registration procedures are initiated, it's possible that you never learn about them because the BPTO might not even let you know that they exist because they will not inform WIPO about them. So that's a further point of attention here. And based on that, to be on the safe side, really, you should have someone keep an eye on your BR designations and avoid risks of cancellation and watch for any publications. It's usually the official fees when you come to the Brazilian designation, they are not that high. And from what we have seen, having someone keeping an eye on your BR designation is also not that expensive. So that's something that can be done and that should be done if you really, really want to take Brazilian market into account when expanding your trademark portfolio. Otherwise, you would risk for very little reason to lose your BR designation and even a trademark here in Brazil. Well, and with that, we can just talk a little bit about the rest of Latin America. As Alvaro said, we consider this one of the main issues why Brazilian applicants have not yet resorted to international registration so often because our neighbors are not yet part of the protocol.
And the main market for Brazilian products is Latin America, in fact.
Exactly. And so far, only Chile has apparently shown interest in joining Madrid Protocol in a more concrete manner.
And there were also discussions in Argentina that led the local patent trademark office to change some provisions of the law, but the negotiations, I don't know if they have progressed or not. But and there's another issue that's curious is that especially people from WIPO, when Brazil joined Madrid, they said now this is going to be easier. The whole Latin America will follow, and so far it has not been that easy as they expected. We have always to count on the pandemic that it's in between the Madrid the adhesion of Brazil and the other countries not being part of yet, but it's an interesting issue to pay attention to.
And that's where we are right now. I don't know if there are any questions, but please feel free to do so right now. I wasn't able to follow the chat here. I'm just checking for any questions.
I just checked. No questions so far.
Okay then. Well, thank you then so much for joining us right now. Thank you for your attention, and of course, if you need any additional information on Madrid Protocol and here in Latin America, here are our contacts. Alvaro? Any
Thank you
final words?
No, thank you for your time, for your attention, and we hope we have been helpful in any way with our information.